Recently, former EIC of Marvel Comics Jim Shooter had a conversation talking about what he thought was going on with comic books, why they aren't quite where they used to be. And I think when Jim Shooter speaks, people should listen.
He's one of the few guys that really has the stature to evaluate the entire comics industry.
Absolutely. So let's hear what he had to say. He was speaking to Tony the Toy Rat YouTube channel, Tony Mendez, during last month's 2024 HeroesCon in Charlotte, North Carolina. Asked by Tony, how do you feel about the state of the comic book industry today? The comic book vet replied, I think they forgot what business they're in. I don't care if you agree with every word they say. Nobody wants to read propaganda. It's just boring, and there's an awful lot of retconning going on. Like I said, I respect the intent of the creators, and Jack Kirby never intended for Thor to be a girl. And Joe Simon and Jack Kirby are spinning in their graves because they turned Captain America into a Hydra guy or a Nazi or something and revealed that he always was. That's just wrong. I mean, don't do that. Stay true to the characters. They truly are standing on the shoulders of giants, legends within the industry. And when you take a character like Captain America, and he was always a Hydra agent, and analog to a Nazi, that not only breaks the character of Captain America and Steve Rogers, but you're also hurting the legacy of Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, the men that actually created the character and all the history. Once you decide to take on the responsibility of writing a Captain America story or a Spider-Man story or Batman, you are taking on the responsibility of working within the confines of the character's history, who they are, their point of view, and what actually motivates them. And I think a lot of writers nowadays just see that as more of a crutch than anything. Like, I don't want to have to be bothered by all this history and the guy that created it and what Captain America actually stands for. Let's turn him into a Nazi because that would subvert expectations and that would be a really cool thing. And then when everybody turns on you and say, this is the worst thing that's ever actually happened to Captain America in the history of Captain America, you bring out the Cosmic Cube, which you said you would never do. And then it turns out that the real Captain America was the Nazi the whole time, and we've had a fake Captain America since that story's open.
Look, these are people that think that they are artistes and should be completely unrestrained in their creativity, no matter how hackneyed it is. I don't think they have respect, and I don't think they care to have respect. These are probably the same people that, as artistes, they'd have no problem painting over top of the Mona Lisa in order to turn her punk rock so they can tell their own story. Give her a fucking mohawk and a face tattoo because it's edgy and it's fun and it's artistic. It doesn't matter the fact that you just literally ruined, something that's significantly superior to you in every artistic way. They have no respect. They don't care. They fashion themselves artists that aren't in the commercial art industry. And I think that's what it comes down to. You have a bunch of people that don't accept the fact that they're in a commercial industry, that don't want to be strained and don't want to have any respect. I understand trying to do your own thing, tell your own spin, but when you're just straight up fucking the people that came before you, guess what? You're showing absolutely zero respect for the people that created the thing you're shitting on. Don't be surprised where everybody doesn't show you any fucking respect.
Yeah, in a lot of ways that's going on kind of left and right within comic books, but there is this enormous vacuum of leadership to where you have the men in charge that are running the editorial teams that are giving the green light to these stories, and that's completely absent. None of this stuff ever would have happened under a Jim Shooter or a Stan Lee or some of the really great EICs out there, because they respected the history, the tradition, they respected the legacy of the creators themselves. Mendez pressed the comic creator as to what he thought was needed in the comic book industry to pull us back to the golden age, the new golden age. This is what Jim Shooter said. Well, somebody who knows what he's doing has to be in charge. Where's the next Stan Lee? That's it. And it has nothing to do with the indies. A lot of them are really interesting. They have really interesting properties and good ideas, stuff like that. But most of them have no training whatsoever. And so they're hard to read and they're not structured right. Or it's just not as good as what they could be. And the majors, or what used to be the majors, they're pretty small right now. They do have some really good talent, but they don't have anybody steering the ship. And so basically each guy, he does what he wants. And that's why you get a creator like a Tom King over at DC Comics with the absence of leadership, of oversight to say, no, you're going in the wrong direction. You're failing the assignment. This is what we need to do to keep these characters strong and build new stories that are going to be additive to Batman or Mr. Terrific or Flash or whatever. He's allowed to just go in there, have carte blanche, and destroy things. And when somebody pushes back, and even what Mark Loyal did, basically stating that the artist that you want to do this cover is not available, he's on vacation, he just summarily got him fired.
There is no leadership. Is it partially because there's no one that could be a leader? I think so. Is there the fact that the industry is so bereft of talent that the little bit of talent that is available out in the market that's willing to accept the pittance wages that the comics industry pays, to the point where those creators realize they're essentially untouchable. They can do whatever they want. Nobody can tell them otherwise. And if they try to tell them otherwise, they can just get them fired, because even the EIC knows there's all of about maybe 2 or 3 writers in the entire industry at this point that can move a comic on their name alone. Everyone else, they've moved on to either more profitable industries or doing their own indie work. And even their indie work is not very good because there's no one to restrain them either. The comic book industry is most successful when you have a strong editorial leader that has a direction, that is willing to say, no, you're not doing that, to creative. And then the sub editors, like the group level editor or the title editor, also has the backing of that strong senior editor and will support them. They have to do the push and pull with creative, but you need talent for that to happen. And honestly, what you really need is money, because talent wants money, and the comic industry doesn't have money, so it doesn't have any talent right now.
Well, when you see somebody like a Jason Aaron, we remember what he did with Punisher, where he went back. Frank Castle was a serial killer since he was 6 years old. His wife was scared of him. His children were terrified of him. And if she had never died, she was going to divorce him and take everything that he had, because Frank Castle was never a hero. He was never, motivated by something that you could understand. He was just a serial killer, and he was using that as an excuse to go out there and kill people, because that's what he really wanted to do. Jason Aaron goes and does that, announces that he's leaving Marvel, which is the right thing to do. You've literally gone out there and destroyed something that generates money, something that people enjoy, something that actually gets people into comic book shops. Immediately gets pulled over to DC Comics, gets a Batman book, gets a little short run on Superman, and now he's on Absolute Universe. And now Marvel bringing him back for Namor, promising that he's going to give Namor the Punisher treatment, as if that was something successful to begin with.
This is where we're at as an industry. Jason Aaron realizes he's not good enough to actually move into a better industry, but he's able to move enough comics so he can probably make himself a pretty decent income on that. He recognizes what he's capable of, uses the industry to do that, and is able to bully it around, because he realizes he's one of the only people that has even a slight bit of name cachet, and it doesn't matter what he does.
When was the last time his Thor run was even good? It was bad for 5 years. He moved over to the Avengers. He has one of the worst Avengers runs of all time. He does what he does with Punisher and all that stuff. And because there's no talent left, he's still considered a big deal and not really the spent goods that he is.
Yeah, the same way that Brian Bendis is. Jason Aaron's a guy that's in an industry that recognizes the industry's dead. And so if he wants to just break things, he can do it. And there's nothing that anybody can do about it. There's about 30 people on fucking Twitter that applaud his utter and complete destruction of anything he touches on a foundational level, to the point where you can't undo what he did to Avengers. You can't undo what he did to Thor. You can't undo what he did to the Punisher. Whatever he's done with Namor, I'm going to guarantee you can't undo that either. You can't undo what he did to Wolverine, because a bunch of people on Twitter that don't buy comic books really, really like it. The publishers seem to think that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, not realizing that all it's doing, for every 2 people that might like it, it's driving 100 more away.
Absolutely. These are the final words of Jim Shooter in this interview. And I do suggest people go listen to the whole thing, because he certainly talks about more than this. I mean, I don't care if you have something to say on social justice issues, fine. Let the character say it, right? don't you say it. If it's you preaching at the reader, or if it's the company preaching at the reader, that's propaganda and you don't want to read it. If a character states a point of view, that's fine. That's the character's point of view, but you do have to operate within the confines of the character themselves. So when you have a thing like Batman the Fortress, and you have, rioting going on and people are burning stuff down, and Batman ignoring that said, you know what, those companies have insurance. I'm not really interested in that type of thing, which doesn't fit into the credo or the motivation set or anything about who Bruce Wayne and Batman are. You're destroying the character. You can do lots of stuff with lots of different characters because they have unique points of view. No one gets upset when Oliver Queen goes out there and challenges a character like Hal Jordan and saying, I think that you were in the wrong here. This is why I think it. Because it makes sense for those characters to be, ideologically speaking, at odds on certain things. But you constantly hear the writer's voice coming through the characters in the narration, and they continuously get work and continuously destroy things.
Well, part of that is because, A, the writers aren't that good. It takes a degree of skill to put a voice to people that are different from yourself. It's easy to put your own voice on stuff. Not only that, but you have a group of creatives that legitimately believe even thinking the way that the bad guy does makes you a bad person. So they make caricatures. They can't write people that aren't themselves, because anybody that isn't completely ideologically identical to them is somehow bad, and they're supposed to be writing a good character. So good people believe exactly what I believe, therefore I'm just going to put my own voice into the character. It's this preschool level mentality of a lot of these writers. That's when you end up with just complete and utter propaganda.
Because they're so narcissistic. They couldn't believe a hero could have a thought in their mind that would be opposed to the way they think, lock and step, to where you have a character like Icon, who's really, really interesting in the Milestone universe. Very unique perspective, showed up as an alien, was taken into slavery, but is essentially kind of a conservative leading character, and that put him at odds with his sidekick Rocket, which was a really good dynamic. What happens when they relaunch Milestone about 4 years ago? The first thing they do is they take all that stuff out that made the dynamics interesting to make Icon who they think he should be, rather than what he was supposed to be when he was created. Guess what? Nobody's interested in Icon and Rocket no more.
Not only do they not know how to do it and they not want to do it, they don't think it's a desirable thing to be able to do it. They don't think that being able to think differently than themselves is an aspirational thing. The same people that scream about empathy have absolutely no ability to put themselves in the shoes of someone else, to think about something from a different person's perspective. All they do is think about the other person from their perspective, like from their own personal perspective. Well, if I was them, I would do the exact same things that I do. They should do the exact same things that I do, and therefore then they will be good people. They can't write villains for the exact same reason. Writing down villainous thoughts and putting villainous dialogue into the mouth of villains makes you a bad person for being able to even think. It's like this degree of virtue signaling.
Well, they also kind of identify with the villains. A lot of times they think, if they just went further, Magneto should have been the leader.
Yeah,
Professor
exactly.
X was completely out of line. It's all over NYX this week.
What the fuck's his name over on Captain America when he was there, and he basically just put Jordan Peterson's words in the mouth of the Red Skull because that would make Jordan Peterson bad. Yeah. Okay. I forget his fucking name because he doesn't matter and he's irrelevant because he gets the free pass. He gets to tarnish his political enemies in the real world. And he doesn't actually have to think like the villain because he just took words from somebody he believes in the real world as a villain and actually wrote them down. So he doesn't even have to think like the bad guy because Jordan Peterson's the bad guy and he just uses Jordan Peterson's words. This is absurdity.
That is the best way to describe modern comic book, especially Marvel and DC. It's just the blind leading the blind. And unfortunately, Jim Shooter is not going to be coming back as the EIC. I think he would right the ship back to where it needed to be. But they don't have time or energy for actual legends in the comic book industry. we got to have people like Jordan White having jobs. Tom Brevoort needs his lifetime job. If Jim Shooter was in charge, those guys would get fired for being bad at their jobs. So I think we're just going to kind of stay in this weird ecosystem where all the bad stuff just balances each other out, and they don't actually get to call anybody out or expect good work, because then I might have to expect myself to do a good job, and nobody wants that.
I mean, there is no industry quite like the comics industry these days, where you don't have to perform, you just have to have friends. Somehow it continues to operate out of the oversight of the parent company, because if either Warner Brothers or Disney were paying a fuck bit of attention, they would have completely shut down their publishing lines years ago.
If you appreciate what Doc and I are saying here, and if you would like the full unedited version of this conversation, it went about 25 minutes, you need to go over to Thinking Critical Patreon. There we have the Doc is Right tier with Doc Unfiltered, where you get this, as well as our unfiltered review of NYX, which will be up on YouTube tomorrow, but heavily filtered out because it's going to go about 30 minutes. If you'd like everything that we've got to offer, as well as the Q&A and a bunch of other podcasts, go check out the Thinking Critical Patreon right now.